Welcome to Music Forever, a podcast by the New Horizons International Music Association. I am Irene Cohen. Mark Goodrum grew up in Boston and area. His father was a drum player. Mark was introduced to playing music himself during his junior high school years. Mark tells his heartfelt story how he ended up as a music major at Grambling University in Louisiana. After a detour through Florida, he was hired to become a music educator in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where he still lives. Mark became a professional saxophone player, which is still his main instrument. After more than 3 decades of teaching, Mark joined the New Horizons band of Rancho, New Mexico. Mark Goodrum's passion for music and connections with musicians can be heard on his own podcast called OTP on the Podium, which you can access through your favorite podcast channel. This interview was done via Zoom in March 2024. Welcome, Mark. Welcome to Music Forever, and thank you so much for agreeing to this interview.
Thank you for allowing me to be on the podcast. Appreciate it.
It was Mark Goodrum who started podcasts for New Horizons players, starting locally in Albuquerque. Somehow I got on his radar and he interviewed me. And so now we said right away, okay, when we start a podcast, I will have to interview you. So it is actually not only a pleasure, but also an honor to have you on this podcast. Mark, tell me a little bit how music got in your life. How did this all happen?
Well, it was kind of a strange thing. I was born in Boston, Massachusetts. We moved to a suburb called Malden, Massachusetts. The band director in junior high school stopped me in the hallway, asked me if I knew what a bass drum was, and I did not. From there, I played a little bit in junior high school. I really don't remember any performances or anything like that. But I went to high school and continued to play there drums. My dad was a drummer, and I really didn't have any skills. I just did what people told me to do. But then my dad passed away when I was a sophomore, I was 16. My mom had multiple sclerosis, and she went into a nursing home, and it was just my sister and I. So that summer, the band directors, it was Mr. Murray and Mr. Blackman, at the band banquet, pulled me aside. I was playing bass drum before, and we had these parades, and I was spinning the mallets. That sort of caught their eye. They asked me if I would be interested in being the first drum major at the school. I didn't know what a drum major was, and they were transitioning the band from more of a pop and marching band setting. So I became the first drum major at the school. They got me suits and gave me training and all the rest. I think the school sort of wrapped their arms around me, knowing my family situation. And I, at that point, started to think, wow, this music thing is kind of fun. I tried to practice more with the drums. I tried out for drum and bugle corps, 27th Lancers. Well, I made it to play cymbals, and I didn't have the money and so forth. I did take a little bit of lessons on drums, but that was it. So that was the beginning of the journey without me even knowing it.
That is an incredible story in that at a very young age, you were forced to grow up. You were 16.
It was crazy.
Yes. When you were without parents, really, or parents who were able to steer you in the right direction, your mother being quite disabled by the sounds of it.
Yes.
And you found, or people found you, I don't know which way it went, but they decided to support you, and they decided to do so through music. What a wonderful gift.
It was, and it was a blessing. My godfather, Hank, came to my rescue. My sister was there, Carol. She's only 6 years older than me, so she was sort of doing her thing. And Hank came to me and other teachers at the school. And I think that played a big role of why I wanted to be a band director, a band teacher. The school, my friends, because I was the first drum major, they embraced that. And it helped me become rather known around the school. And then this wonderful lady, Mrs. Lily Davis, I still call her every year, Mother's Day and so forth.
Wow.
She stopped me and said, and this was my junior year in high school, I heard your dad passed, and she said, do you have any plans for after school, after you graduate? I had no plans. I'm a kid, you know?
Yeah.
And so I went to her office, and I said, well, I thought I'd go in the military. My dad was in the Army for a while. She said, well, my grades were average. But anyway, she said, and I really need to say this, she said, well, have you thought about going to college? My friends were wonderful friends. They were all going to college and had great grades and so forth. So I didn't think I could get in. And so we applied to 15-ish schools, and I got accepted to about 7 or so because they waived my fee, you know, for the application.
Yes.
Grambling State University gave me the most money, which was in Louisiana, still is, and I didn't even know where Louisiana was. I was
right.
And she was from Georgia, Mrs. Davis. She went down to Louisiana on her own time, own money, came back, brought me yearbooks that I still have. She paid for me to fly down there by her own money. She later would tell me I was her new project. And with Hank and my godfather and others, my godmother Claudia and Mrs. Davis, I started at Grambling, and I would not be, Lord knows where I would be without them.
What an incredible story. And Miss Davis obviously has a special place in your heart and in your life, and wish there were many more Miss Davises out there to give what she gave you. What a beautiful story. Once you were in university, did you carry on with percussion?
Yes, I did. I went there. It's kind of funny because, you know, I ended up in Shreveport, Louisiana, landing there in the plains, 1977 in the summer for band camp, and it was hot.
Yeah.
And this was the Grambling State Tiger Marching Band, world fame, and it was an experience and just thrown into the ocean of the South and of playing, and I had very little skills compared to the other musicians there. I could tell I was inadequate. I didn't have the chops that I needed. I was homesick, scared, and all that comes with it. So I played drums. We had midnight, 2 o'clock practices in the morning and tried to keep up, made the drum line for a while. And then later I found out that I thought I was being recruited as a drum major. Well, Grambling at that time was recruiting drum majors all over the country. And so I wasn't anything special.
Right.
So I kept playing drums for, I think it was about a year and a half. A friend of mine later would be my fraternity brother, Stanley. He had a drum set in his dorm. And I saw the music for drum set, and it scared the living daylights out of me. And I went, oh my, I'm never going to be able to do this. My uncle Chip played sax, and I sort of liked that. I had dabbled with it a little bit. A buddy of mine there at Grambling, Joe, I bought his old saxophone for $150. It was under his bed. And I went to the sax teacher, Mr. Seals, God bless him. And I said, you know, I want to switch from playing drums to sax. And he told me, well, you're going to have to go talk to Mr. Harris, the drum instructor. I'm not going to talk to him about this. So I was scared to death. I went to Mr. Harris and I said, I want to switch and blah, blah, blah. He was not happy. So I switched over, and a lot of my buddies that played drums, they didn't like the idea either of me because it was very competitive sections, you know. And I went to saxophone, and again, I was very behind everyone else. And so I started to work hard to try to learn how to play the horn.
And the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah.
You still play the saxophone. Is that your main instrument?
Yes, it is. And I'm still trying to practice to play it right.
That never ends. That never ends. Yes. Once you were done with university, what happened to you?
Yeah. So I knew I needed a job because Mom was still in a nursing home up in Massachusetts. I tried to get back as often as I could. I found the love of my life, my wife, and she had another year in school. So we put out all these job requests, and I got a couple of offers, and one of the offers was down in Florida, Ramblewood Middle School, Fort Lauderdale, Broward County. It just so happened that one of my Uncle Freddie and his wife knew some people down there, and I started to try to learn how to be a band director. Grambling was about that, trying to put out band directors. But nothing gets you ready for the real world, as you know.
Yeah.
And I had about 70 beginners in one class of sixth graders. And we did well, and the parents were wonderful. They gave Bert and we got married down there in Florida. I also had an opportunity to be an assistant director at a high school there, Ely High School, and help with the halftime shows. I decided that we should leave. It was about a year, and just didn't work well with me. And so we came back to Louisiana, and we spent about 6 months there subbing and trying to figure out what our next move was going to be. At that point, I was going to Grambling for teachers' fairs. I was leaving out of the building, and a sign was on this table. I couldn't pronounce the word. And I asked the woman behind the table, what is that word? And she said, Albuquerque. And I said, what is an Albuquerque? This is a true story. I said, what is an Albuquerque? And I had been as far as Dallas. We had played for Dallas Cowboys and things like that. And she said, well, it's a place. Sit down. Her name was Patricia Salisbury. She said, we need band directors. And I signed a contract right there.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
I drove back to Bert's home. God bless her mom. We were staying with her mom. And I said, I got a job.
It's the Albuquerque.
Yeah. She said, where? And I said, Albuquerque, a place called Albuquerque. And I had been given $1,400 by my godfather for graduating. We had a 1977 Plymouth Fury. We threw everything in there, and we were off to Albuquerque.
Were it not for that sign on that table or that lady saying, you don't know what an Albuquerque is? Sit down.
I don't know. You might want to edit this part out or not, but we were driving up to Amarillo. This is 1984, because I graduated in 82. So we're up in Amarillo, and we turned west. We almost turned around. We saw a bulletin board. It was a white board with black writing on it, and it said the N-word, and it said, keep out. I turned to Bert and I said, do you want to keep going, or should we turn around? And she said, let's keep going. We got to keep going. So we just kept on driving. It was the best choice. This Albuquerque and New Mexico was literally the land of enchantment for us.
Wow. What a sad story that this is the sort of thing you had to face in your lifetime. And what a brave decision to say, we'll keep going, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was the right decision, obviously.
I started at the school at Manzano High School. A young man named Bruce Dalby, who was on my podcast, and I learned so much from him. That's where I started to cut my teeth and really absorb what I needed to learn. And then the best thing happened was I started at Harrison Middle School, and the parents were wonderful. They just wrapped their arms around Bert and I. We had our first child, and we were on our way. After 5 years, I went to Grant Middle School here in Albuquerque, and I stayed 26 years and retired 33 years in 2014. It was a gift from the Lord. that's when I found out about some band program called the New Horizon Band.
Yeah, how did you discover that, and what made you think this looks like something I would like to pursue?
I had a few opportunities while teaching, but my playing suffered as I was going through teaching. You're playing music with the kids and so forth, but it was nothing to keep your chops up, you know? And so I really felt like really needed to practice and play, but I didn't know how to do this. Another gift, a blessing, was Ron Lipka, who we lost a few years ago. And Ron had helped me through my career. And he called me and he said, "Mark, I heard you retired. Why don't you come over to a town a little north of Albuquerque, Rancho? We could use some saxophones." Started doing that, and the atmosphere, and it was what I needed to get my chops up. And I met a young man there named Richard Firth, and he had a quintet. And it was what I needed. And we played to a CD.
Wow.
This is what he would say all the time. He would say, "Meet you at the bottom right."
Yes.
And he would push the button, and it was... So I sort of started subbing for the New Horizon Band. I missed working and getting the band together and getting the sound together. And then the opportunity to work with adults. I didn't have to tell, somebody to throw away their gum, or I'm going to call your parents, and that kind of the discipline. That was the beginning of a joy of being in this organization.
In essence, you joined to be a player. You wanted to improve your level of playing, which for me as a non-professional musician is so surprising to hear that somebody who's been teaching music for that long then feels, well, no, I better improve this. Can you tell me what it feels like as a sax player in a band? You see somebody else conduct. Are there moments where you go, "Oh, I wouldn't have done it that way," or "Wait a minute, I really learned a lot from that"?
Oh my goodness, Irene, what a question. That's a great question. Yes, to be honest with you, it's like, I sort of will team that up with like being an athlete. If you're out on the sideline and you see what's going on, you go, "Oh, I could have done blah, blah, blah." Everybody has their own style on the podium. You can relate to the issues that come up, whether the percussion or the dynamics are not right or what they're trying to do. Mm-hmm. And also, all my life, I analyzed other directors so I could be better. One thing I tried to make sure I knew was that I was not God's gift to the podium, and I wasn't the best player. I tried to use that in my teaching to understand what the student was going through, as well as looking at other directors and saying, "Oh, I like the way they did this. I got to remember that." I always talked about stealing things and saying, "Okay, Irene, boy, I like the way you got that section to play softer there and what you said." And so I got to write that down. My youngest son, Jarrett, plays professionally in the Navy band. As he grew and became a professional, he started teaching me as I was playing. And he said, "Daddy, have you tried this new reed?" And I would hear him play, and he was over in Japan, and I'd say, "How did you do that altissimo? What was that?" And he said, "Oh, I use this fingering," and blah, blah, blah. And that has all been part of the joy after retiring.
So the learning keeps going on. New Horizons clearly is offering that to you. If you would compare New Horizons to other bands that you may have played in, community bands or anything like that, how is it different?
Oh, wow. The biggest difference is the atmosphere. I think if you're a musician and you've gone through college, or especially bands that are playing for money, you come in, you got a woodshed, and they don't have time. And I've been guilty of this, to be nice. The bedside manner is out the window. Sax says, "We're going to do this again. Don't move early." New Horizon is, as you well know, it's such a godsend to the world because New Horizon is all over the world. It gives us a place to come and enjoy the ambiance of just playing your instrument and loving music and having that camaraderie with other people. That's the biggest thing about New Horizon, is the atmosphere.
Yes. And it's mentioned by everybody who participates in this podcast. is the socialization, the friendships, the lifelong friendships, the thinking I'm going to join for a few years and staying there for decades. It is really very impressive what people say over and over again about their particular New Horizons group. Let's talk a little bit about your amazing and wonderful podcast on the Podium. What made you decide to interview other musicians or people who are in the music world? What is it about doing a podcast for you that is so fulfilling? You tell us how many episodes you've done and how you approach people and who you approach.
We're approaching about 21 episodes now, give or take. My oldest son, Justin, has a podcast that they do for basketball. And one day I was talking to my wife, and Ron Lipka was still alive. That's my only regret. I didn't have a chance to interview him. I had done a previous podcast for Albuquerque Public Schools called Open Book, and I really enjoyed that. One of the episodes on the APS podcast was about fine arts, and Ron was on that podcast, so I'm glad I had him on that podcast. I said, I just wanted to talk to people about their journey. I got in touch with you and others with the International New Horizon program, and I love hearing other people's journey because in one way it's the same, but it's different. I'll never forget you telling me about you looking through the keyhole and seeing your grandfather and hearing your grandfather playing, and it's just stuck with me. And I was like, wow, that could be a movie, and all the way to one of the last ones I had with Dorothea Taylor, who plays drums. She was on the Jimmy Fallon show, the Tonight Show, and the journey, all these really miracles that happen to people. My wife helps me out and she does the voiceovers.
Yes, and it is a fantastic podcast. I am completely with you. I think that because music is such a positive thread through people's lives, whether it's as a professional or as an amateur, it connects. And for you, I think that the beauty of your story really is how many people decided that they were going to assist you simply by asking, why don't you play the big drum, but also actually paying for you to get to Louisiana to help you apply. These are incredible stories. And that is because these people clearly believed in you.
When I didn't believe in myself.
Yeah, what a beautiful story. And I think maybe because music has meant so much for you and has given you so many positive things in life, you would like to hear about other people's experiences because, like you say, people have very interesting stories about why they make music and why they chose this instrument and how it ended up for them in a certain place in the world and how they ultimately got connected to New Horizons. So this is a wonderful example. Thank you so much for providing all this to us.
Thank you for asking me on your podcast.
Yes.
So glad that you got it up and running.
Yes, thank you. And it was all with Mark's help. Mark and I spent many hours before I started this podcast because, like other people taught him and took him by the hand, Mark took me by the hand. And Mark, thank you so much. I honestly can say that if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have taken on this journey because there's a lot to learn. It's a real learning curve as well.
Are you having fun?
I'm having a terrific amount of fun.
Great.
Because, like you meet people who you haven't met before. It is a wonderful medium. I believe that the stories are very interesting. And people have choices to listen to one podcast or another. They don't have to listen to all of them. They can listen to some of it or some of them. So I think it's a wonderful way to find out about one another, about that person in your band or that conductor in front of your band and hear their story. Well, thank you very, very much and all the best. And I've said to you before, I'm hoping that we will be able to make some noise together somewhere in this world, playing in some sort of New Horizons event, because that would be fantastic. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you. Play all the right notes.
I would like to thank Mark Goodrum for giving this interview. If you would like to find out more about Mark's New Horizons band of Rancho, please go to www.newhorizons.org. nhbrr.org. Music for this podcast by Mary Riddle. Swag on. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Music Forever. If you are interested to be interviewed for this podcast, please email us at nimapodcast@gmail.com. That is NHIMA podcast@gmail.com. See you next time.